Hello. In this video, we'll be talking about the Romantics in our first lecture on the topic, addressing in this video William Wordsworth and William Blake. What does it mean for the author to be an individual? What does it mean for the author to have a vision? And what does it mean to be an individual in writing and to have that vision in poetry? At this point, we'll be turning our attention to the lyrical form. The lyrical form is the voice of the author speaking to him or herself, as if it was a monologue and we are simply listening in. We're going to take a turn for the next few lectures away from the novel and the fictional prose forms that we've been reading of late, and look at how the Romantic poets fashioned a powerful and enduring response and indeed protest to the Enlightenment thought that has carried us for our last few readings. William Blake, as well as William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the next Romantic poet that we shall encounter, were dissidents. They lived outside the general sphere and circle of English and London society. Wordsworth himself wasn't even from the city at all, as we'll soon learn. Blake, as well as Coleridge, Blake was. And Blake was horrified at what he saw happening in London of his time. To him, London was a debasement of human nature, which was meant to be harmonious with larger nature, of childhood, of spirit, and of a sensibility of being in the world, what humans ought to be doing, how they ought to be living. He used his art, both in textual as well as visual form, to lodge a powerful and enduring protest against what he saw as the debasement of humanity. In his magnum opus, among actually several, but the one that is frequently covered as the entry point into Blake, the Songs of Innocence and Experience of 1794, a double work that couples, as he wrote, the contrary, the contrary forms of the human soul. Innocence on the one hand, experience on the other. The promise, nobility, the childhood, sublime state of humanity. Innocence, we're going to talk about sublime a great deal in the next lecture. And experience, what it is to live as a human. Knowledge, experience, the fall. There are elements of the prelapsarian, the paradise, as well as the fall. Blake was a deeply religious man, as well as one who was closely inspired by Milton, as were all of the Romantic authors. And yet he had a very unorthodox, eccentric version of faith, his own personal mythology. William Blake was active in the late 1780s and to the 1790s. We're in a period when England is thriving economically. The Industrial Revolution, the innovation of mechanical capitalist gain through factories, through specialization of labor, through imperial conquest of places all around the world for England, was nearing its height. London was a place of enormous soot, of power, of immigration, urbanization, and it was also Blake's home. In 1789, he writes a series of poems that he titles Songs of Innocence In 1793, he writes another cycle called Songs of Experience. And in 1794, in his own hand, as you can see here, he puts them together in this form. He innovated a new way of creating these plates and brings them together. As you may wish to watch this optional video by the BBC from some time ago, makes clear Blake was someone who thought himself visited by visions. I want to take seriously not just the content of that vision, but the proposition that people, the poetic soul, ones who make themselves sensitive and alive to a higher order of consciousness or messages from other realms, can be the repositories of these visions that can then be condensed, converted, translated into words, and published for others. All of the Romantics are obscure, well, except for Lord Byron. All the Romantics are obscure people during their lives. They were just as crazy to their own contemporaries as it might sound in this introductory description of them. And yet they were onto something very powerful. A form of dissent against the Enlightenment thought that they saw as corrupting the world around them. A revolution and revolt against the obsession with rationality and alienation, as they saw it, from emotion, a more powerful channel, as well as an obsession with childhood, nature, the properties of autonomy, freedom, and a kind of sacred worship of art in its various forms, of course, for these writers in a literary form, although we'll also talk about Turner, a painter, in just a bit. And so for Blake, as you can see in this start of this long poem, Auguries of Innocence, another one of these totem ideas, these leitmotifs, these central ideas for them. The vision was to see world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower, that through the meanest, most simple, and most abundant grain of sand, one could, through attention, through a sense of the connection between things, through awareness of the power of the sublime, of what nature is always addressing us, if we simply focus not on money and not on gain and not on power, but on humanity, on nature, on our connection to the world, could see the world in that grain of sand and to see heaven in a wild flower. Most people had become alienated from this. And in Songs of Experience, we'll get to the Chimney Sweeper in a second, he gives expression both visually and textually in a literary form to a kind of poem, a kind of song, as he called it. There is music, there is the art, there are the words that returns us to this prelapsarian, this state before the fall, where children are the emblems, and nature and families and the connection with mothers are symbols of this innocent, of this more wholesome and older form of being. Let's look at this text. This is the Chimney Sweeper. The Chimney Sweeper is a text that is important and useful for us, not only because it's quite resonant, but because it appears twice in Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, 1794 version that we're looking at right now. But here's the text, and I want you to just ask yourself, it'll be obviously, this is just a rhetorical question. The answer is clear. Which one of the two versions is from the Songs of Innocence, this earlier and first part of the text, about childhood, about the and other symbols of innocence, and then which is from the Songs of Experience? Let's look at the text. Here it is in Blake's own version, his painted version. It's hard to even call it a manuscript, as well as the text on the other side. The Chimney Sweeper. I'll try to make the printed version a bit bigger for you. You also have the link to it. When my mother died, and it's in the voice of this child, chimney sweepers, and we'll talk about that, who they were in a second, but it's relatively self-evident. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry, weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. A lot of alliteration. There's a pun there, by the way, also obviously on weep. I could scarcely cry, the pun between sweep and weep. Right? There's little Tom Dacker who cried when his head, that curled like a lamp back, was shaved, so I said, hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet, and that very night, as Tom was a-sleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, and Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free. Then down a green plain, leaping, laughing, they run, and wash in a river and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise up upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark, and we got with our bags and our brushes to work. That the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. Nice final unsettling slant rhyme at the end with warm and harm. This text, spoken in the voice of a child who is inducted into labor, child labor, who works in this dangerous, unhealthy, blackening occupation of being a chimney sweeper or assistant to chimney sweepers, where the children could get into those chimneys, the places where that are blackening the sky, blackening the kids' skin and hair, as well as poisoning the world. And this is the beginning of what is, in our, obviously just a tiny bit of what to our day is the start of economic and industry adulterating and poisoning the sky and our planet. What is being done here is it's poisoning the kids. These children who are so pure and innocent, they don't even realize how bad they have it. They are orphaned. Their parents have to sell them into labor to make it because of their desperate poverty. The chimney sweeper speaker says of his colleague, his friend, another chimney sweeper, little Tom Dacker, who cries, and he tries to console him. The text is about this attempt at consolation. Tom imagines in his dream what we see in Blake's version of it, that the chimney sweepers are almost part of this vine, this growth. It's such a green and wholesome picture. It almost belies what the poem is saying about the chimney sweeper. He has this vision that they are led out of these coffins that they sleep in, these symbols of what is bringing them death. An angel comes with a bright key, and they are all set free. They go down to the green plain, which is what some of the earlier poems and songs of innocence describe, where children are meant to play and bathe in the river, shine in the sun, wash in the river. And naked and white they left, and they go back. And the angel told Tom, if you only behave, if you do as you're told, you'll have God for your father. If your own father is dead, you're orphaned, and you'll never want joy. You'll always have joy. And so he wakes up from this dream, and this dream gives the boys the kind of strength and consolation they need to go through their day, take up their brushes, and get to work. And they'll never fear harm. Let's look at the other text of the chimney sweeper. The other chimney sweeper text is a bit briefer. The chimney sweeper, a little black thing among the snow, a little black thing among the snow, crying weep, weep, same pun, in the notes of woe. Where are thy father and thy mother, say? They are both gone up to church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter's snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I'm happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, and are gone to praise God and his priest and king, who make a heaven of our misery. Let's look at the illustrations for this one. The chimney sweeper, the second chimney sweeper, from song, and this one from Songs of Experience, is a much darker image, for it is also a much darker poem. Here the child is sort of bent over and blackened, pelted from the sky and almost derided, hated by the city as well as the celestial forces. The color is much darker, as well as the ambience. Here the child understands. He's under no illusions of how mistreated and abused he is by the world. His parents haven't sold him because they have no choice. They have both gone up to the church to pray. They are part of this constellation, this structure of abuse, of ignorance, the church, which makes a heaven of our misery, right? The God and his priest and the king. God, we've gone to praise God and his priest and king, right? The priest and the king are complicit in making a heaven of our misery, of telling us that our lives are really heaven, that as long as we do as we're told, as long as we believe in the approved religion, we find. What we are seeing here is breaking forth, as we'll in the language of the next poem, the shackles, the manacles of reason, of politeness, as we talked about in a previous lecture, the sense of decorum and how to act properly. What is correct behavior? Here is someone shaking and saying, look what is happening to our kids. What kind of society is this? It is interesting to note, by the way, that this poem, the Chimney Sweeper, the second Chimney Sweeper from Songs of Experience, and you can see it, sorry, where is it on this page? This is Blake's own manuscript, his own notebook, drafting the poems. And there are two here that I'm going to look at. I can't even find it, excuse me. The Chimney Sweeper, because I was... here it's the first one, actually. No, it's the Song of Experience. Here it is, right here. Okay. The poem is on, for us, it's on the left side of the page. Make it, I'll expand it a little bit bigger. Find the details. Here it is. And it's fascinating to read the manuscripts and the changes that Blake himself made in writing this. Because I was happy upon the heath, there it is, among the wharf, and the anger in the poem. This poem is not the only one of its sort. One more text of this ilk that I've asked you to read is London. London by Blake. I wander through, and that poem also, we can read here's the actual poem. We can also consult the manuscript of this text. Here it is, The World in Turmoil. This is London with its factories, and it's a city that it's fully come back. This is it's the realization of what Dryden had thought the crown of the world. It is at this time by the most powerful city on earth. To me, it's mind-boggling to note that this text, this notebook, which he's writing down in his own hand, the poem, just poems as they come to him, that will make up this collection. Here's London. I wander through every street. That's the one that we're going to look at in a second. But a poem that you may also know, we're not going to focus on it now, he composes it on the same little scrap of paper. Of course, you can the tiger burning bright in the forest of the night, and some of those tricky parts you can see he's working with. He's trying to work it out here. Should it be dare could frame thy fearful symmetry? beautiful of thy eyes. In what shadow and what art could the sinews of thy heart? There is a whole stanza here that is struck before he goes back to the hammer and what thy chain. So the tiger is right there, sitting alongside a few other well-known poems, but one that we're going to look at right now. Here it is, London. So London, let's read the print version. This is a poem of unadulterated rage. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every band, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweeps, and there they are again, those kids. Every blackening church appalls, and hapless soldiers sigh, run in blood down palace walls, the complicity of the state, of the army, of the palace, of the seats of power. But most through night streets I hear how the youthful harlots curse, blast the newborn infants tear, and blight with plagues the marriage hearse. Horrible. This is an inferno on earth. This is hell that has become of the paradise of England. This is the author of Jerusalem was builded here, imagining the paradise that England should be and once was, and perhaps one day also will be, if the prophetic voice that he is writing, of course no one's reading him, and during his day, that the prophetic voice that he is using in his own lyrical poems, just speaking in his own thoughts, would one day be heeded. The poem versus the manuscript. I wandered through each dirty street. I don't know if you can read it, but there it is. The first line in the manuscript before it was changed in his own hand. I wandered through each chartered street. Let's think of the difference of dirty street. Now he's paying attention to the basement of the city, to the physical and unnatural state of the city. Chartered, and you can see, and he did intend to repeat it. Near where the dirty Thames, this polluted river running through the city, does flow. He changes the charter. To charter is to chart, right? To force it and to put it on a map, to turn it into some object of navigation, in commerce, and so on. It is also to charter, to offer like a royal charter, as you would for a company, is to privatize, to take something that was once a public good and to offer it to a private monopoly. That is to charter. To charter is also to force something into a specific course. So the Thames, the flow of the rivers, they really were changed to not just put the streets from wherever they once were in the former medieval village of the city of London, but to put them onto a chart, onto a grid. Likewise, that's being done to the Thames. The streets and the river are being turned into something that is not following its own natural course. They're also being turned from a public good into assets for the wealthy, those who earn royal charters, and it also has this this element of constriction. Every mark and every face, marks of weakness, marks of wherever he goes, he is observing. He's using those powers of observation, but in order to unleash his rage, his anger, his feeling. He's not just observing people and noting down funny ways that they behave in order to make it a novel. He's seeing pain everywhere, marks of weakness, marks of no. I hear in every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, and he did change that line as well, in every, and here is the German, and I read it, you can read from the British Library a remark about this. The German forged, I forgot what it was originally, manacles, but it was bands or shackles or something, or links. The mind forged manacles. Besides the fact that that's a much better line in terms of the, again, alliteration, mind forged manacles. But instead of it being German, these sort of, and that's a reference, it's an obscure reference, but it's about these German mercenaries who were brought in to maintain the peace, lest some British subjects follow. He's writing in the years of the French Revolution, which was the crucial European event of the time, something that meant a great deal to everyone, especially though to Blake and everyone in England at the time, but especially to Blake and to Wordsworth, this throwing off of the monarchy, revolutionary spirit to recreate society, the call for liberty, which then descends into chaos, murder, bloodshed, the French Revolution, 1789, and then the years of the terror of 1791. And so he crosses out the German, he crosses out the specificity of the historical moment, and he calls it the mind-forged manacles. There's no external force, there's no mercenary, there is no hired gun. Why are people submitting to a kind of slavery? It is their own mind-forged manacles, the most powerful kind of restraint, the most powerful kind of handcuffs that we submit to are the ones that we imagine ourselves. Our inability to imagine a different society. We constrict, we restrain our minds, our individuality. We force ourselves into those shadows of experience that perhaps a critique of fiction and of the novel and of the age of sensibility of the 18th century, the thrust of 18th century English writing could deliver. Taking what might be, fascinating and true adventure and turning it into a kind of miniature imperial project. Taking what is the passions of what it is to be a teenager and the terror of men and turning it into a very neat little lesson in propriety and chastity. The mind-forged manacles are very powerful. And that's what he, the speaker, the poet here, in his prophetic mode, has freed himself. And he makes him attuned to the pain, to the suffering of others, to the chimney sweepers, the blackening appalls, and to the complicity of seats of power. Very different than this is Composed Upon Westminster Bridge, a poem by a near contemporary, someone just a bit younger than Blake, someone who was not a painter, but a poet and philosopher, William Wordsworth, another of the pioneer romantics. William Wordsworth, and we'll talk about him next time in conversation with his partner, his literary partner, Coleridge. Wordsworth, in 1802, someone who was very much attached to France, actually had his actual romantic partner, his wife there. Here, calling out for Milton, just as Blake. They don't know each other. Blake idolized Milton. Milton, thou should be living at this hour. Here is Milton's version of London, and then we'll finish with one more Wordsworth poem. Milton, he calls upon him. It's an apostrophe to Milton. You should be living now in 1802. England has need of thee. They need you. She is a fen of stagnant waters, altar, sword, and pen. That's metonymy of what England once stood for, a more authentic, a more sincere form of religious devotion. The sword, its real power, its pen. These are the symbols to England, to Wordsworth of England. Fireside, the heroic wealth of hall and bower. All this has been forfeited, their ancient English dower of inward happiness. We are selfish men, writes Wordsworth. Oh, Milton, raise us up, return us again, and give us manners, virtue, freedom, power, another set of metonyms for what we lack. Thy soul was like a star and dwelt apart. Thou had a voice whose sound was like the sea. Pure as the naked heavens, majestic free, so didst thou travel on life's common way in cheerful godliness, and yet thy heart the lowliest duties on herself did lay. Your voice was like the sea. It surrounds this island nation, this island empire of England, and was as powerful, constant, endless as the sea. That is the paragon, that's the standard that Wordsworth aims for. And we'll talk about how he conceived of himself as a poet in the next lecture. I want to end right now, however, with another poem by Wordsworth, and I'm sorry I don't have it. I didn't get it. I thought I had it. Here it is. Okay. This is Composed Upon Westminster Bridge. Later in life, he Wordsworth figured out the exact date, September 3rd, 1802. A typical poem from a specific moment, as if the poem is just the expression of a burst of emotion, of a vision, of something that he saw. Very typical. And in the next and more extended conversation about Tintern Abbey, we'll see the same kind of structure, where he talks about, as he says here, a specific place at a specific date. This landmark poem that we'll talk about on its own, Tintern Abbey, follows the same kind of logic. This is a very different vision of London. Here, he's on his way out. He's not from London. He's spent a lot of time there. Wordsworth has kind of anticipatory nostalgia, as one often does, for a place that he's leaving, who knows for how long, on his way back to France to see Isabella, mother of his child. Earth has nothing more, but still there is some common elements with Blake. This too, like that last poem, Milton, Thou Shalt Be Living Now, London 1802 by Wordsworth, is a sonnet. And it is said, by the way, that Wordsworth's inspiration to write his dozens of sonnets came as well from Milton, from reading Milton's sonnets. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by, a sight so touching in its majesty. This city, London, now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning, silent bare, ships, towers, domes, and theatres, and temples lie open unto the fields. Again, that metonymy, the symbols of the city. They lie open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep on his first splendor. Valley, rock, or hill, ne'er saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. He anthropomorphizes, personifies the city, as well as the River Thames. Also then compares it. He ascribes those feelings, that calm that he says the river has, the river glided in its own sweet will, to himself. He felt so calm. All of this in description of the same city that Blake had said was utter hell. How could it be? Let's take a somewhat closer look at this poem, and let's also look at the manuscript of it, which isn't terribly changed. Here is Wordsworth's own notebook, once again, just like with Blake. Earth has nothing to show more fair. Dull would he be of some, or let me see, dull would be of soul, of soul, changed it from heart. This inhibition about, or lack of inhibition, I should say, lack of inhibition about speaking about the soul is so characteristic of the Romantic, talking about not minds, not education, not virtue necessarily, but about soul, heart, spirit, the spirit of the age, which is a phrase that we're going to get from Shelley, Percy Shelley, whom we'll come to also in another lecture soon enough. But the city is devoid of any of those people, the industry, the oppression, the abuse that Blake spoke of. He is seeing it, Wordsworth is here, passing in a carriage on his way to the city, as if the city too is part of nature. Look what he does. The city wears like the garment, just as the river glides. The city's alive, but none of those oppressed souls are in it. All the people, where are they? They're asleep, but they're not even asleep. The houses are asleep. The very houses are asleep. There's actually no people at all in this city. The city, as well, is open unto the fields and to the sky. All these structures which block out the sky that's being blackened by those chimneys, right? And it even says the smoke. He mentions the smoke as it's going up. The smokeless air, right? He erases all of that. As if he's trying very hard. So his effort is so earnest and so powerful in order to erase any of that, in order to connect the city to the fields that surround it, to the river going through it. to the sky above. And that is how he arrives at what he calls the fairness, the beauty, again, beautiful, the beauty here. It's beauty of his view. He's not unaware. He's the same author of Milton. England is a fen. England is a swamp. But it is in that vision, that ability to have vision, that the Romantics each make their contribution. A vision that is not rational, but is intensely personal. It is bound up with emotion, powerful emotion, as we'll talk about. And it's something that views something, the object of it is worthy of the poetic expression, the poetic statement. It is a sublime object, something intensely beautiful, something intensely or terrible, as with the Chimney Sweeper and the abuse of children, but something that moves beyond the level of the ordinary, beyond the ordinary, towards something that the poet helps all of us to see.